Thank you, Chad, for that warm introduction. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate the opportunity to speak with each of you at Opentalk this year. I'm going to be talking about the subject of delivering a world-class customer experience. But before we get underway, obviously it's important to acknowledge that the customer and the customer experience, there's been a lot of changes over these last few weeks, and we're still navigating those changes. Think about it with Walt Disney World. I mean, Disney World has been closed for several weeks. That has never happened before. I mean, Mickey Mouse has been out of work. And people all over the world are dealing with challenges that they've never had to deal with before. But from a customer experience perspective, I think if there's a silver lining, it's that sound service principles apply no matter the circumstances. So as I share some of these principles with you today, obviously we're going to be thinking about them in the context of what's going on right now, but also beyond what's going on right now. So with that in mind, as you heard from Chad, my background is primarily with the Walt Disney World organization. I did work there for 20 years. I started out on the front lines as an attractions operator working at 20,000 leagues under the sea. I was Captain Nemo. That was the best job that I've ever had. And I did such a great job with that they sent me to a ride called It's a Small World. And I heard that song 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I can't even walk by the place anymore. And if somebody, around me starts singing it, I have to stop them because I'll have to go back on the medication. I paid my dues. I got into management in the early 1980s and managed different locations around Disney World. My very first management position with Disney, and I wish I had saved one of the business cards because it was the greatest title I have ever had. I was the supervisor of Fantasyland. I mean, a title doesn't get much better than that. And I had a wonderful 20-year career working there. And now what I do is I focus in on this whole idea of customer service. And I'll make a disclaimer as we get underway with this. I do use quite a few Disney examples because obviously that's my heritage. It's what I grew up with. But I would never get up here in front of you, on this video and say Disney World does it perfectly, because they don't. They screw it up sometimes just like every organization does. But they do have a single objective. When you leave Disney World or Disneyland at the end of your time there, they want you to have one thought in mind, which is, when can we come back? Even though you have no money left, nobody would ever accuse Disney of being a nonprofit organization. So it's about loyalty. Now, you all obviously operate in a different industry than the one that I grew up in, but that objective of loyalty is very much the same. You want to attract new customers. You want to retain the customers that you have, especially right now with what's going on. You want current customers out there saying wonderful things about their interactions with your agents and the employees in the organization. So while you may be in a different industry, the objective of loyalty is very much the same. So that's the focus of my discussion today. When Disney does surveys, when Disney World does surveys of their guests to ask them what had the biggest impact on their experience, what do they remember about the experience, what makes them want to come back, the top drivers are how clean the place is, how friendly everyone is, and how organized the place is. I mean, those are the top three things that regularly come out. Very rarely does anyone say anything about the rides, which is kind of frustrating. You build these huge rides, the Tower of Terror, if you've been on that, it's a haunted hotel theme. You go inside and you sit down in these seats in these elevators and it takes you 13 stories up to the top. When you get up to the top, the elevator starts to shake and it feels like it's breaking. And why people want to do this, I have no idea, but it's a 13-story free fall where you literally come out of your seat on the way down. And these seats are Scotch guarded because you don't want to go on this right after you had breakfast. And then when you land, it zips you back up to the top and it drops you again. Now get ready for this. That one ride all by itself cost Disney World $100 million to build. Just that one ride cost $100 million to build. But think about it. When they ask people, what impressed you about Disney World, people say it was clean, it was friendly. Again, from a design perspective, that's frustrating. But from that business perspective, I think it's very important because Disney World isn't selling rides. They're selling an experience. Now think about that. They're selling an experience because rides are commodities. My guess is wherever you live, there's a place where you can go to get thrill rides pretty close by. So certainly the rides have to be great, but they can't compete just on that. It has to be the overall experience. So from the moment you start planning your vacation to Disney World to the moment you leave at the end of your vacation, everything in between, that's the product. And think about your companies. I mean, the contact center is such a huge part of the experience. And in the contact center experience, there are multiple touch points too. So certainly the quality of the work that your agents do has got to be excellent. Nobody ever argue against that. But the quality of the overall experience has got to be excellent as well, especially right now. And here's the thing that I would ask you, to write down somewhere and just take back to your people. It's the difference between doing what we do with a task approach and doing what we do with an experience approach. Task versus experience. And just by saying those words, you know what I'm talking about. You can go into any business, you can talk to somebody on the telephone, it doesn't matter what it is. You can tell when the person is focused on doing the tasks. And the reason that's an issue is when we or our people do what they do with the task approach, our customers, who we want to feel loyal, especially right now, they feel processed. And it's very difficult to have that loyalty connection, to feel that connection when you feel like you've just been processed through a system. Versus you go into a business and they're still getting the task done. We all have tasks that we have to get done. But you can tell just by the way things are playing out that they care about the quality of your experience. Now, as the customer, we feel valued. And I think wherever your customers fall on that continuum between feeling processed or feeling valued, that's going to be their loyalty factor. And the reason I think we need to reinforce this with our people all the time, again, especially right now, is because of how easy it is to fall into a task mentality. When we're really under pressure, things are coming at us, we're getting bombarded with requests and information, it becomes very easy just to process people. And I want to share with you 3 key things that I think are at the heart of any service-driven organization and any service-driven person within an organization. Now, you know your world better than I do. When it comes to the contact center world, I work with a lot of contact centers, but you know your world better than I do. But I think that you'll find these principles really do apply. So the first principle that I think is at the heart of any service-driven organization is this idea. We need to look at everything we do, every interaction that we have through the lens of the customer. Look at everything through the lens of the customer. And the reason that that's such an important principle is because most organizations don't do that. They'll say that they do, but they don't. They see things through their own internal lens. They don't see it through the lenses of the person who's being served. They design the processes for their own internal convenience instead of the convenience of the customer. And again, think about it, that customer lens has changed dramatically right now. I mean, they're dealing with a lot of different organizations. They're dealing with a lot of different companies. And sometimes they're panicked in those dealings. So we need to turn that lens around. And when you do, and when your people turn that lens around, everything starts to change. You start to understand why customers may say some of the strange things they say, why they may complain about the things that they complain about, why they may ask some of the bizarre questions that they ask. And I'm sure if you think about it, your folks especially right now, are getting some bizarre questions. One of my favorite questions I used to get when I was working at Disney World is Cinderella's castle. So if you picture Cinderella's castle at Disney World, it's 180 feet tall. You can't miss it. All right, everything there is built around the castle. And I would have guests come up and ask me, what? Where's the castle? And I always wanted to say, what do you think this is? The world's biggest restroom? I would have guests who would literally come up to me and ask me this question. What time is the 3 o'clock parade? How do you answer that? I always wanted to say, let me have your video camera. I'm going to videotape you asking that question. When you get home, invite your neighbors over. Show them the video. Yeah, that'll raise your reputation in the neighborhood. I would be standing there in my Captain Nemo costume, my little sailor suit, my sailor cap. Guests would come up and say, do you work here? I'm thinking, I'm a grown man. No, this is just my closet next to my Spider-Man costume. But when you turn the lens around, you start to understand that people are out of their comfort zone. No matter how many times you've been to Disney World, it's still a sensory overload. And so that's why we were trained on things like this. When a guest would ask a question like, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? What they really wanted to know is, what time does it get here? Because the parade's about 1.5 miles long. So it doesn't get to some spots along the parade route till about 3:30. So it really is a legitimate question, but only if you're seeing it through their lens. And if I'm standing there in that Captain Nemo costume and a guest comes up and says, do you work here? You tell me, and you know the answer to this, what are they really asking? They're asking, can you help me? Now, admittedly, they asked it in a funny way, but when you understand the lens, you start to go deeper. You start to think about, what is the guest really asking? Because here's what happens. It happens to every one of us. It happens to every one of your people. The longer we do what we do, we start to think our customers know what we know, and they don't. Those things that your folks deal with all the time, those situations that they deal with all the time, the customers don't. And that's why so many times when something goes wrong with a customer interaction and we analyze it afterwards, we'll usually say it was a communications issue. And I always think, what does that mean? Most of the time, here's what I think it means. We made an assumption that the customer understands how all of this works, and the customer really did not understand how all of this works, and the relationship suffered. So we need to turn that lens around, and I want to share with you a way to do this. It's going to sound familiar, but there's a couple of nuances to this that I'll share with you. It's something that I call service mapping. It may sound a little bit like journey mapping, which many of you are probably already doing, but stay with me here. There are some differences. We all have certain processes through which we serve our customers. It could be the various channels through which customers interact with you. Certainly there's processes there. It could be within those channels, the escalation process, replacing a product for a customer. We all have certain processes through which we serve those we serve. And of course, we want to make sure that every piece of that process, every element, is as excellent for the customer as it can possibly be. So service mapping is a tool for engaging your people and making sure that that happens. If you have the handout in front of you, you can take a look at page number 2 and follow along with what I'm talking about here. You look at that process, and with a team of people that are involved in that process. Now, right now, you might do this virtually. Typically, you would do it in a meeting. You might do it virtually. Now, it works no matter how you do it. And you map that process out step by step. So obviously, looking at the screen, each box represents a step. But here's the key. Each step must be through the lens of who is being served, must be through the lens of the customer. So if you're mapping out a process and you get to a spot and somebody says, well, now we do this, you have to stop the discussion and say, while we are doing that, what's our customer doing? That's a very different mindset. So the first step is, let's identify a process that we want to get better at. Second step is, as a team with the right people, let's map that process out through the lens of the customer. And then the third step, and here's where the magic of this tool really kicks in. This is on page number 3 of the handout if you have it in front of you. So you've got the service map. Now for each step that you just identified, you ask 2 very important questions. What would mediocre service look like or sound like at each step? And what would excellent service look like or sound like at each step? And here's the reason I suggest that you do it exactly that way. If you pull a step out of a process, and we're still with our team right now, you say, okay, what would mediocre service look like here? I promise you, as good as you may be, there'll be some steps when we start talking about, well, this is what mediocre would look like. I promise you, somebody in the group is going to say, you know what we just described as mediocre kind of sounds like what's happening at that step, which sounds negative, but it is not, because first of all, and this is very important, I'm not talking about poor service. And here's why. If we've given a customer poor service, we know it. We know when we've really screwed up with someone. Mediocre service, that's more of a sin of omission. It wasn't bad, but it was just mediocre. It wasn't enhancing the experience. And I do this with a lot of companies that I consult with, help them service map their processes. Invariably, this is what we find. Some of the processes, some of the steps in the process, they're providing stellar service, best-in-class service. This forces you to look at every step. No matter how good you are, there are always opportunities. And it provides you then, as a leader, for saying, well, if that's what's happening at that step, and we're saying it's mediocre, then what would excellent service look like? And that's where the ideas really come out. Now, I'm not naive. I know you can't implement every idea that might be generated. But I promise you, just by thinking this way, some of the ideas that come out, you'll be thinking, why didn't we ever think of this before? Why didn't we ever think of this before? And I want to share with you, show you how powerful this can be. Back in the early 1990s, and this is when I was still working with Disney World, we wanted to raise the bar of service. We wanted to get better at what we were doing. And we looked at hundreds of processes. Where can we improve? And one that we saw as an area of opportunity was this one right here, was getting the guests from the park back to their hotel at the end of the evening. Because contrary to popular belief, the end of the day at Disney World is not a happy time. And if you've ever been there with your families, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're there all day long, you're hot, you're tired, you have no money left, and this is the end of the day at what's supposed to be the happiest place on earth. So we said, this is an opportunity. So we pulled together cast members that are involved in this process, and we mapped it out. Now, just like anything that you would map out in your own operation, there are internal things going on behind the scenes to make all of that happen. But through your lens as the guest, that's how you get back. So what would mediocre service look like? What would excellent service look like? And they came up with wonderful things, like the bus drivers now. The bus drivers, they will hold Disney trivia contests on the bus ride back. They'll get the kids on the bus singing Disney songs, as long as it's not a small world, because you can only take so much of that. But remember, and I think this is important, remember the bus drivers were already driving the buses. So there's no added cost, there's no added time. It was just taking a step back, looking at a process that we had been doing since 1971 and turning that lens around. And from my perspective, most importantly, what really made this work was getting the people involved that do the job every day. But the one that shows me the power of one idea, because once in a while an idea comes along that just has a significant impact on the experience. And for me, in this particular circumstance, it was that last step, entering the hotel room. In my opinion, the hardest job at Disney World is being a housekeeper in the hotels. Cleaning up after people on vacation, that is a hard job. And if you've ever visited Disney World with small children, if you remember how your kids collected the stuffed Disney characters, the stuffed Mickeys and Plutos and so forth. Here's what happens. Most people who go to Disney World, so the one in Florida, they stay for 4 nights and 5 days. That's a typical length of stay. So here's what happens. You're in the park, your kids buy some of the stuffed characters. That night they put them in your hotel room. The next day you're back in the park, your kids buy more of the stuffed characters, and that night they put them in your room. And over the course of your vacation, they accumulate because the kids keep buying them. What the housekeepers would do while you're off in the park playing, they would come into your room, move the characters off to the side, clean up, and then off they would go because they had a lot of rooms to clean. One evening, one housekeeper, her name was Helen, she decided she was going to do something different. She was doing the nighttime turn-down service in one of the hotels. And she went into this one family's room, and again, the characters were all over the floor. She did everything she was supposed to do. She cleaned up the beds, she cleaned up the room, she cleaned up the beds, she did the turn-down service, but then she took the stuffed Disney characters, put them up on the children's beds, up on the pillow, and then she tucked them in. Put the covers right up to the necks and tucked them in. And then she left a little note saying, I know you had a busy day. The characters told me they were tired, so I tucked them in for you, signed her name Helen, and left it on the bed. Probably took her 20 seconds to do that. But I want you to imagine that family coming back to that room. Because remember the family we're talking about. And if you've been there, you know as that family is walking toward that hotel room door, you know the kids are fighting with each other, right? If you've been there, you know the parents are fighting with each other. That's the magical Disney moment that's happening here. And they walk in and this is what they see. And it's Disney again. It's magic again because one housekeeper who has a hard job said, I'm going to create some magic. It always starts with an idea. But how do we leverage an idea like that? You know, so many times I'll work with an organization, and as I meet employees across the company, I find these fabulous behaviors that if they could just capture the best of those and weave those behaviors into the process, the result would be amazing. That's what service mapping does. Because remember how I told you we pulled together cast members to talk about it? Well, in one of those meetings, Helen, that housekeeper, was there. So when we were going around the room, so what are some things you could do? What are some ideas you have? What are some things you've heard about? And it came to Helen, and she said, well, I don't know if it means anything to anybody, but what I do is I tuck in the Disney characters. Everybody thought this was the greatest idea, and it took off. Housekeepers were talking about it. Managers were talking about it. It's become kind of legendary there. It's even become something of a competition for the housekeepers on different things they can do. Like some of them, they'll line the characters up in front of the television set, you know, and turn it on. Some of them, they'll put the characters with playing cards in their hands, like they're playing cards with each other. But it all goes back to an idea that wouldn't have been leveraged if we didn't incorporate this type of process. And so my suggestion to you, and right now, if you could just be thinking about a process that you want to get better at and pull together the right people, service map that process out through the lens of the customer, and how do we make each step excellent. Now, I will admit that now that I don't work at Disney anymore, that I am waiting for some disgruntled housekeeper who's getting ready to quit to put Goofy passed out in front of the mini bar in the room, you know, those little empty Jack Daniels bottles all around him, cigarette butts. It would be worth it. Second principle, and don't ever say that to anybody that I just told you that. Second principle that I think when it comes to what we're experiencing right now and what your agents are dealing with is this. Pay attention to the details because everything speaks. Everything speaks. Every detail, from the quality of the work that your people do to the tone of voice that they have as they're talking to a customer on the phone, every detail is either enhancing your brand or it's detracting from the brand. And brands are a very fragile thing. And again, especially right now, brands are a very fragile thing. So is every detail saying what it's supposed to say? For example, this is a photograph that I took at a hospital one time that obviously puts a lot of effort into their landscaping. It's colorful, it's vibrant, but I'm sure what you see right now is the Pepsi can. Now at Disney, we had a term for everything. We would call that a visual intrusion, which it is. Because when I think about a hospital, I'm thinking about clean, I think about attention to detail, and it doesn't take too many things like that before at least subconsciously I start questioning the quality of everything else. And so something I'd just like you to think about, and again, have this discussion with your people. In your world, what's the Pepsi can? You know, what's the thing that could take away from the quality of the experience that you want to deliver to your customers? I take pictures everywhere I go because there are always these wonderful opportunities that come along. And the co-author on one of my books, Terry Yanovich, and I, we were getting on this small commuter airplane in Abilene, Texas, really small plane. As we got on the plane, I said, Terry, look at this. And I got a picture of it. And I got a close-up. There was duct tape on the wing. Now, everything speaks. What would that say to me as the customer? Now, it does say something about my intelligence I still got on the plane, but that's a different issue. But I'm guessing, like most of you, I'm a big believer in duct tape. But that's moving me too far out of my duct tape comfort zone. And this is one of those planes that's so small that the pilot is the flight attendant. You know, if you've ever been on one of those really little planes where the pilot comes out and gives the spiel. So I got on the plane, I said, there's duct tape on the wing. And there was some technical name for it. He said, oh, no. That's high-speed aviation tape. Everything speaks. You tell me, what is that? That's duct tape. I don't care what the technical term is, and it's not building my confidence. So again, I would ask you to think about in your world, what's the duct tape? You know, think about that. What's the duct tape? And it can be something as, because I know there's multiple channels that your customers communicate with you through. There's multiple channels. It could be something as simple as getting different answers about the same issue through different channels. It's a different application, but it's still duct tape. I was checking into a hotel one time, and I was walking down the corridor to my room, and I took this next photo of a sign that was in the hotel corridor. Now, I thought this sign was funny. You might not. I thought this sign was funny. Now, I'm not sure whose convenience they're talking about, but I'm pretty sure it's not mine. And when I got into my room, and I got into my hotel room, taped up on the bathroom mirror in my room was this little sign that said, "Towels are inventoried every day. You will be charged for any missing towels." Now, everything speaks. What's that sign really saying to me? You're probably a thief. You are probably a thief. You know, and they were nice towels. I could hardly get my suitcase closed. No, I didn't take the towels. But I'm sure that wasn't the message that they intended, but it doesn't matter what we intend. It's what the customer perceives. And so again, the words that we use, especially right now with this accelerated pace that many of your folks are dealing with, sometimes we can get kind of short because things are moving quickly, and that can come across as uncaring and curt to customers. So the words we use. And it's not just a physical thing, it's something that I also call attitudinal everything speaks, where we've all dealt with somebody that we could tell really didn't want to be helping us, whether it was face-to-face or in a contact center. We could tell just by the tone of voice they didn't want to help with us. Or we go into a business and they're texting on the phone, on their phones, or having a conversation with a coworker rather than taking care of you. You know how that feels. I call that attitudinal everything speaks. And I'm going to let you in on a few Disney secrets right now that you have to promise to never tell anybody. And some of these are going to shock you, so just get ready. I have heard Disney cast members, Disney employees, swear. I have. I've heard Disney cast members complain about the guests. I did it myself when I was Captain Nemo. I have seen Cinderella smoking a cigarette, which is really weird, because there she is in all her glory with the dress and the wig, and she's lighting up. These kids are driving me crazy. Big cloud of smoke following around. But where would you see that at Disney World? Backstage, behind the scenes, because imagine you bring your family to Disney, everybody's excited, you paid a lot of money to be there, and there in front of the castle is Cinderella, and your child, your precious child, runs up to Cinderella, tugs on her dress, she turns around, has a cigarette in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other hand, says, "Kid, I'm on break." What would be the impact on your child? You'll probably need therapy. There might be a lawsuit involved, but here's the business question. Does it matter at that moment how many billions of dollars they've spent building Disney World? Does it matter? It's not worth a dime. So I'm going to ask you a weird question now, and I know this is a weird question, and I just want you to think about this. In your world, what are those potential smoking Cinderella behaviors? And I'm not talking about Cinderella or smoking anymore. You know what I'm talking about. It's those behaviors that sometimes creep into somebody's performance, usually when they're under pressure, but take away from that brand image that you've worked so carefully to craft. And it's a reality. So I think we need to have this discussion with our people, especially again in the situation that we're in right now. And I want to share with you just an easy way to do this. It can be done in a physical format. It can be done in a virtual format. This is on page number 4 of the handout. No matter how you decide to do this, here's the way it works. You, as a team, you identify what are those potential everything speaks distractors that could take away from the customer experience. One for one, what are the everything speaks distractors? They could be physical distractors, they could be attitudinal distractors, but what are those things that could take away from the experience? Here's the beauty of doing this with your team. Your people will know the answer to the question. You don't have to tell them. And people don't argue with their own data. So you get them thinking this way. What would be those distractors? And then for every distractor that you come up with, what would be the everything speaks commitments that we all need to be committed to make sure that that distractor does not occur? So for example, and again, the beauty of this is your people, again, will know the answer to that question. And again, people don't argue with their own data. So going back to my Disney days, here they build Disney World. It's beautiful. If you've been there, it's beautiful. They've got a castle. They've got themed lands. It's a gorgeous environment. In that environment, wouldn't an everything speaks distractor be if there was trash everywhere? You know, if there was trash all over the place? That would take away from the image. But think about the reality of that place. It generates a mind-boggling amount of trash. So because of that, it's a reality, but it's a distractor. One of the Everything Speaks commitments is, as a cast member, as an employee, if you're walking through the park and you see a piece of trash on the ground, it is your job to go over and pick it up and throw it away. It's non-negotiable. And it doesn't matter if you're Captain Nemo or the Vice President of Marketing. You go over and pick it up and throw it away. And going back to what I talked about earlier, the number one compliment that Disney World gets is how clean the place is. Well, that's why. It's everybody's job. And here's the beauty of it. If you build it into the culture, you really engage your people in this and you build it into the culture, after a while, the behaviors just become part of who you are. You don't even have to think about it anymore. We could be walking through Disney World, having a conversation. I could see a piece of trash on the ground, go over, pick it up, throw it away, not even miss a beat in our conversation because it's wired into me. And it does get weird after a while because you start doing it in other places, you know, like in malls. It drives my wife crazy. I go to some cities, I get exhausted because where do you start? But that's the idea. You want it to be just part of the way we do things because everything speaks. So again, my challenge to you with your teams is to sit down and have that discussion. What are those potential distractors? And then what are those commitments that we all need to be committed to make sure that those details say exactly what we want them to say? So we've talked about looking at everything through the lens of the customer, paying attention to the details because everything speaks. The third principle that I think is at the heart of a service-driven organization is this idea. Create moments of wow. Create moments of wow. And I chose that phrase, moments of wow, very carefully because I think sometimes people who do what I do, talk about customer service, sometimes I think we do you a disservice because we love to use those huge, grandiose wows, which are wonderful when we can do them. And my guess is you could share stories with me about agents who have done things that I would just go, wow, that's amazing. When we can provide customers with those big wows, absolutely. Legends are made of those. And we need to share those legends. But I also want to stress, and I hope that you take this back, that the little wows, the moments of wow are important too. Because here's the key, little wows add up. Little wows add up. Just those right now, you think about what customers are dealing with, just that kind word that you share with a customer, the empathy that comes across in the agent's voice, the words that they choose, the extra patience that they might show for a customer who is either upset or confused. Little wows add up. And again, one of the things that I would really encourage you to do with your teams, again, whether it's virtual, in person, however you're doing it, is share those little wow stories. Share those little wow stories because you want people to remember and focus in on the impact that they're having on customers. Now the question becomes, how do you create these little wows consistently? And I want to share with you an approach for doing this. So this comes from a tremendous amount of research on what customers expect. Now this research was done across industries, but I think you'll see how it applies in your world. This is on page number 5 of the handout. What the researchers found is that customers literally have a hierarchy of expectations. That foundationally, fundamentally, customers expect accuracy. And when it comes to the contact center, I think that's a no-brainer. My fundamental expectation is you know what you're doing, you do it right, you do what you said you were going to do. I mean, that's the foundational expectation. Once that's in place, which it must be for anything else to count, then the next level up is availability. How easy are you to do business with? How easy is it to navigate the maze? If I need to get someone who can help me, if I need to get somebody live that can help me, how easy is that to do? Once that's in place, which it must be for anything else to count, then the next level up is partnership. Do I feel just by the way this interaction is playing out that you truly care about me as your customer? Or do I feel like I'm one of many, many customers that you're dealing with and you're just sort of moving me through the system? And then finally, and they've proven this, the highest level of service that you can provide to whoever it is you're serving is advice. When you teach a customer something that they did not know before, when they're better because of the interaction that they just had with you, that's as good as it gets. Now, I think about what's going on today. I think there are a lot of opportunities to do just that, and that's as good as customer service gets. That locks in loyalty. Now, a couple of nuances with this tool, because I really do hope that you sit down and you have this discussion with your team about what does accuracy look like at excellence and sound like? What does availability look like and sound like at excellence? Each level earns you the right to the next level up. As a matter of fact, you could cut the pyramid in half. Below the line, accuracy and availability, they would call those two dissatisfiers. So if I'm the customer and you're the company, and you are not accurate and you're not available, I'm actively dissatisfied. So you lose points by not doing well at those two. Now the frustrating part about this is you don't get any points for doing well at those two. Why not? Because they're expected. It's the ticket of entry. You've got to get them right, but I'm not going to give you points for getting them right because that's what I expect. Above the line, partnership and advice, those are now the wow opportunities. Those are the things that can differentiate you from all of the other options that customers have out there. So the bottom part keeps you in business, the top part is the differentiator. And again, the way to turn this into a tool is, if these are the things that our customers expect, which the research shows they are, and I mean it just makes sense anyway, then what are the behaviors that we need to demonstrate at each of these? That's where the consistency comes into play. So imagine no matter how I'm dealing with you or who I'm dealing with, everyone's operating with accuracy, availability, partnership, and if it's appropriate, advice. That's how you create those little moments of wow. So those are the three elements that I think are at the heart of any service-driven organization and any service-driven person within an organization. It's everybody on the team seeing through the lens of the customer. Everyone on the team paying attention to the details because everything speaks. And everyone on the team just looking for those moments of wow. How can we create those moments of wow? When an organization does those three things, and they do those three things consistently, the outcome, going right back to what we talked about at the very beginning, is customer loyalty, which is what we're all shooting for. I hope that these ideas have been helpful for you during this session. Please stay strong, stay healthy, stay as positive as you can, and I wish you the very best.